Well, disasters caused by extreme weather have become significantly more frequent over the last 50 years, according to a new report by the UN's World Meteorological Organization. The findings come amid a recent spike in climate-induced disasters around the world, including floods, heatwaves, wildfires and tropical storms. The number of extreme weather events across the globe has risen fivefold since 1970s. More than 3,000 occurred between 2010 and 2019. The total damage caused by the disasters amounts to more than $3.5 trillion. And 2 million people have been killed, with 91% of the victims in developing countries. But the UN Weather Agency says the annual number of fatalities has fallen from 50,000 in the 1970s to an average of around 18,000 in the 2010s.
The bad news is that the economic losses have been growing very rapidly, and this growth is supposed to continue. We are going to see more climatic extremes because of climate change, and this negative trend in climate will continue for the coming decades anyhow. And if we are successful with climate mitigation, we could stop this negative trend around 2060s.
Well, let's get more on this now with Denis McClean in Geneva. He's the spokesperson for the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Denis. This is really quite a comprehensive report spanning 5 decades. Can you firstly tell us which countries or regions in the world have been the worst affected by climate-related disasters?
Well, there's little doubt about that. It's mainly low and middle income countries that have been the worst affected by climate-related disasters. Over the last 20 years alone, we've seen the number of such events double, and it's developing countries which suffer disproportionately. In terms of economic losses, it may be the developed world which suffers in absolute terms the highest losses, but in terms of percentage of GDP, it is low and middle income countries which can least afford these losses who suffer the most. And certainly in terms of loss of life and damage to critical infrastructure, it is the low and middle income countries that suffer the most. You know, it is true that we're seeing a decline in mortality caused by disasters thanks to better early warning systems. But it's also true that much more needs to be done in terms of making these early warning systems available to developing countries, because as it stands at the moment, only half of the 193 members of the World Meteorological Organization have access to state-of-the-art multi-hazard early warnings.
Now,
At the same time, they lack the resources to invest in resilient infrastructure.
does the report draw direct links between the frequency and intensity of these weather-related disasters and global heating and the climate crisis?
Yes, I think there's no doubt about it, especially over the last 20 years, where if you look at the whole spectrum of disasters caused by natural hazards and man-made hazards, we see that something like 90% of all recorded major disaster events where there has been loss of life have been linked to climate change, and amplified by the fact that we're living in a much warmer planet now than we were in previous decades of the last century. There's no doubt, I think, that many disaster events are exacerbated and worsened by things like rising sea levels, warming seas, and more intense and unpredictable rainfall patterns.
As you say, I guess, one of the bits of good news in this report is that fewer people are dying as a result of these weather-related disasters, thanks to preparedness and early warning systems. But in terms of the huge economic toll, what can be done to rein in the negative impacts that these disasters might have on the global economy?
Well, one initiative that the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction has undertaken with several UN member states is to raise awareness of the need for more disaster resilient infrastructure, and to encourage countries to understand where their disaster losses are happening and to invest in making their infrastructure more resilient. We saw a good example of that just a few days ago on the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, which killed over 1,800 people in New Orleans. But on this occasion, a hurricane of similar strength resulted in very few casualties. The economic losses are very significant, of course, but life was protected by the fact that the city of New Orleans managed to invest over $14 billion in new flood defenses. And we see also in Turkey, over the last 10 years or more, Turkey has invested heavily in making schools and other critical infrastructure earthquake resistant. And that has paid off, I think, on many occasions when the country has been hit by earthquakes. We see fewer people losing their lives. And schools and hospitals in Turkey are now world class when it comes to protecting life from earthquakes.
Okay, Denis McClean from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much again for joining us on Money Talks.